So, what's the biggest difference between undergrad versus grad students, and what are the expectations for grad students?
Yes, the biggest difference is that the undergraduates are really working hard trying to learn all this material that is taught to them kind of carefully, and it's mostly until they get to their senior year. It's mainly known. Right, so they're learning about they're learning how to create new knowledge in the future in a job or in some other endeavor. The graduate students, right off the bat, you really have to learn to teach yourself rather than depend on the instructor. And the big challenge for a graduate student is with a master's degree or a PhD, the expectation is that you're independent and you can generate new knowledge. So if what you need to accomplish can't be looked up in papers or books, then you just have to invent it yourself, right? Well, some undergraduates can do that too, but I think there's much more of an emphasis among the graduate students on intellectual independence.
Yep, exactly. Okay, so what does it take to succeed in grad school? What are some essential skills and mindset we need to develop? And then as an undergrad and a grad student, how to develop them?
Yeah, good question. I think that I think that resilience is really important. I think the master's degree experience, which you had, and the PhD experience, they have some similarities in the sense that you're thrown into this new problem and you have to generate a novel contribution that's never been done before. That's pretty challenging, and it's really about the sort of the level of detail that you go into and the scope of it. It's hard for some student, for the undergraduate mindset is not about that, right? It's not, and I think that some students have a hard time sort of getting out of that classroom mindset and into the independent thought mindset. It takes confidence and it takes a lot of drive to be able to do that. Now, how students can develop that, I would say undergraduates can develop that by doing internships and working in laboratories, doing RUs, which is about RUs. You were an undergrad here, right?
So, I did my undergrad in Ohio.
You were an undergraduate in the United States. So RU is a U.S. specific program for research experiences for undergraduates. And so, research experiences at your own school, summer research experiences at other schools, internships in companies, they're very different, right? I worked in a company as a computer programmer as an undergraduate, and the big thing I learned from that was I really had to operate independently. Nobody was going to tell me what to do. Nobody was babysitting me, exactly. And it took me a couple of weeks that I think really frustrated my boss to learn that, I've just got to, even if it takes me longer, I've got to figure it out.
That's true.
Yeah.
And now we are more action orientated. So in order to develop these skills and mindset, what are some good habits or habits we need to develop?
Yes, good habits to develop. I would say develop your ability to independently figure out what's known from the primary literature and textbooks and the internet, especially for master's and PhD students. Be able to diagnose where the field is, what we know well, what we know less well, where the holes are, what might be right, what might be wrong.
So these insights, how would you develop that? I think you have to know the scope, the scope and also in depth about this domain in order to develop insight like that.
That's exactly right. And the way to do that is to go to journal clubs and read a lot. And that's absolutely right. And also go to conferences and of course this is a difficult time for going to conferences, but really learn from your peers. So I mentioned before we started filming that I'd been to Ohio State a couple of times for these really terrific conferences which would have 50 to 100 attendees, and those were fantastic because you're there with the best people in the most successful people in a given field of study. And you learn from them, where are the gaps? What are the gaps in what I'm doing? What are the gaps in what you're doing? How can we work together to solve these? So that really helps. That peer-to-peer, or even better, that the interacting with people that are very experienced and really have been thinking for decades about the problem.
I see. That's awesome. Yeah. So for current undergrad students, I'm interested in a lot of different topics and domains. But how would I narrow it down, like how would I balancing between exploring the field versus focusing?
Right. That is a real challenge. Our PhD program is set up, for example, and I think it's mostly true of our master's program too, but our PhD program is it's set up in a very regimented fashion.
Mm-hmm.
It's a rotation based.
Yeah.
So students rotate in typically 3 labs to find their research home. But that's 3 labs out of 50 or 100, right?
Yeah.
So they do have to make some difficult choices.
Yeah.
I'd say you want to find a topic that really excites you,
mm-hmm.
but also you want to find a lab that you really enjoy working in. So
mm-hmm.
so you've got to really hit both of those in order to have a fun time and to maximize your chances of having a good time in graduate school and getting a lot done. The relationship with your other lab mates and the advisor is absolutely critical. So I would say if you found the perfect problem but not the right advisor or not the right lab, go elsewhere.
If you find
if the problem is the problem that interests you the most, but you don't think you can work well with the advisor, I would say go find another advisor.
Interesting. People is more important than the projects you're working on.
I think so.
Why?
I think because there are a number of world-class projects. Now you can't work on bad work, but you're not going to do that here. But if the atmosphere in the lab is not the right atmosphere for you, and particularly if you don't have the right kind of relationship with the advisor. So some advisors don't give any advice at all, and some students like that. Some advisors are very hands-on, and students don't like that. So you've got to pick the right kind of person, and it's surprisingly important. So many experienced people say this: choose the advisor, not the project. Which is that's a strong version of the statement. I would say try to pick both, but make it's a constrained optimization problem, right? And you got to weight both.
Yeah. And then, do you want to comment on like the advantage or disadvantage, the large lab versus the small labs?
Yes, I think that's important. The large labs generate lots of nature papers, and they often have lots of money. That's why they're large. They're run by famous PIs, so you can meet a lot of people. You don't get that much attention from a faculty member that has 40 people in their lab. So the small labs, they have really a lot of advantages, and I think in particular the relationship that you have with the PI in a small lab is more personal. Yeah, and you get more hands-on attention. We actually find this that because we have this rotation system, a lot of students come here thinking they're going to work for the big famous full professor. But they end up deciding to work in the smaller lab with these really excellent assistant professors that we have. And the reason their labs are small mainly is just because they're just getting started.
Yeah. Okay.
And so both are great. Both can be great. It depends on
which one.
Yeah.
Okay. So for current undergrad students, like they're thinking, is grad school the right move for me? What should they consider before they make that decision?
That is a great question. I would say that don't go to grad school just because you have good grades. That's not that helps you get into a good graduate school. There's no question, but it's not the whole reason to go. I think you want to go to grad school because you really want to get deep into the problem. The kinds of jobs that you end up having with a master's or a PhD are different, and they are jobs that I personally would prefer because you're deep. You're leading a technical group on a research project or a research and design project. Those are the reasons I think to go to grad school. You really enjoy getting deep into the problems. A PhD, that's the thing. The PhD is great in many regards, but it's a long time commitment. 5 years or more. That's a long time.
I see, and also you have to think about that will probably delay my lifespan plan a little bit.
It does, yes. It certainly delays your earnings, right? Because graduate, PhD students have a stipend, and it's enough to live on, but it's not enough to save, right? And you're not buying a house. That's for sure.
Okay, so for current grad students, I'm doing multiple projects at the same time, but how should I know which project is worth pursuing, and then when should I kill a project before I waste too much time and resources?
Yes, that's a great question. The advisor and the other lab mates should be helpful in that, but you're right. I had that experience, which is in grad school. I had to kill a project that I really loved, but it was obviously not
working out.
It was not bearing fruit. So I had, after about 2 years, I had to alter my project, and it cost me probably about a year. And to learn the new techniques and do a new project. But it was the right call. It was a difficult call at the time, but the right call. And my advisor was very helpful to me in making that call. He worked closely with me. He was running a fairly small group. He worked closely with me, and we just looked at how things were going, and we realized that we better move on. We better move to something that was more technically doable at that time.
I see. So if you had the chance to went back and then do things differently, what would you do things differently in order to maybe shorten that 2 years?
Yeah, it's a good question. What would I have done? I mean, I guess if with hindsight I could say, well, if I had known why that project wasn't going to work, which took me 2 years to figure out, that would have been great. But I don't really have any big regrets about how things went. I chose problems that I really love, and I'm very excited about the work that's coming out of the lab these days. So I've really got few regrets. I have been inefficient at times, but the inefficiency is
it's necessary to learn and to grow.
Exactly.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so for current grad students, do you have any advice for them to publish paper? Or should they wait and then publish in very well-established journal, or should they just publish as soon as possible?
That's a great question. Different labs have differing opinions, and I think it differs by project, and it differs by the goals of the student. So you really have to work closely with your advisor about that. I personally think that getting things published is more important than getting it in the most prestigious journal possible.
Gotcha.
Because you get it out, you go through the process, which is a challenging process.
Yeah.
The reviewers are so hard on you, and they all make you do all this extra work. And so I think that I tend toward let's get this published. Now, you don't want to publish stuff that's wrong, that's for sure, or sloppy.
Yeah.
But you do. But you want to publish. Now, the students' goals matter. So if work could conceivably be published in Nature, but the student needs to move on to get a job or something like that, then you can either find another student to kind of complete the process, or just publish it in a slightly less prestigious journal.
Gotcha.
Which, I think I think the assistant professors worry, partially because they don't have tenure. The assistant professors worry a bit more about the prestige of the journals than the senior professors do.
That's true.
But what I found is I published in some really high prestige journals and some solid but lower prestige journals, and the work, if it's good, it gets cited. If the work is good, then people find it.
That makes sense. Just focusing on doing the good work.
Yeah.
Okay. So for international students coming from different cultural background, me, I'm a Chinese student, and then they experience culture shock and also language barrier to different extents. So what can they do in order to more quickly adapt to the academic environment here?
That's such a hard question for me to answer. I mean, I grew up in the Deep South, and I came to college in what I considered the North, and I guess so I had a little bit of culture shock associated with that, but nothing like a Chinese student coming to the United States. And it is such a challenge for international students, and I really admire their bravery. It's a big step to come halfway around the world, working in a language that but don't know the intricacies of a society that you don't that is you can't know much about when you arrive, because China and the West really arose in parallel. They didn't interact for most of that time. So I think that trying to force yourself. When I travel to places, I try to force myself to interact with locals just to have a more interesting experience. But that's just to travel more, have more fun when I travel, or have better experiences when I travel. For a student, I think that if we take the Chinese students, I think it's important to force yourselves to interact with students outside from other places. So for example, if you come here and you speak Mandarin, and you have but you don't feel confident in your English, you just have to force yourself to do it. And of course, you know this much better than I do. But it's a challenge, right? Because it's intimidating to do it, but it's extremely important, I think.
Exactly. I feel like a lot of times it's not just a language problem, but it's as you said, it's a confidence problem.
Yeah.
You're not very comfortable. You feel like an outsider in this country. So, do you have any tips on people how they develop their confidence? I feel like it's the same thing like how you develop a confidence as a researcher and a graduate student.
Yes, it's a great question. I think. And I don't always follow this advice. But it's advice I give to myself.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can't don't get overly worried about making a mistake, right? We all make mistakes, and it's fine. I think that I find it extremely difficult to go to another country and use their language at all, because I'm embarrassed about how bad. So if we pick a language, I know some French, I know some German, but it's a challenge for me to force myself to try to speak in French or German, because I know I will make big mistakes and embarrass myself. But you still have to do it, I think. And so I think that. I give you an example. I think our students do a great job with this, but I see this problem with students. It is related to academic things. A really challenging thing is to ask a question in a public room with 100, 200 people in it. But what if your question is stupid, right? And I can tell you, I have asked stupid questions in public, but I don't worry too much about it. I just think, I've asked a lot of really good questions, and I've asked some stupid questions. It's just, don't worry about it.
Okay. For international students, how would you suggest them to get the funding? Any advice?
Yes, it's frustrating to me that many of the mechanisms that we have for funding for students to get independent funding or funding from training grants often depend on either being a citizen or permanent resident, which is frustrating. I disagree with that policy, but I don't make the rules. There are some. I would say for international students who are interested in getting their own funding, which gives them, it's great for the resume. It gives them independence. The advisors love it. I would say there are private foundations. Often are very, like American Heart Association, Alzheimer's Foundation. There are many of them. The Craig Nelson Foundation, which is spinal cord injury. Many of these organizations fund fellowships for graduate students, and they mainly don't care about the citizenship issue.
I see.
Also, HHMI, Howard Hughes Medical, they have programs for international students as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So last question, can you give some advice to BU BME undergrad and grad students in general?
We really appreciate you. That's one thing I would say to our undergrads and our grad students. We really appreciate everything you're doing. I think you're going to get a great education. You're going to have really brilliant futures. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Help us build our society. There are some things that one of the things I think the students have been a real force for is the social justice issues. And so I've been really encouraged by how much the students have been engaged, graduate students and undergraduates, engaged in helping the department sort of improve its processes to be more fair and more just. I think that we really like that level of engagement that we get from the students. So I would encourage the students to engage with us and help us become a better department. Also, super important, I always tell this to the graduating seniors, please come back, right? Stay in touch with us, because the main reason I say that is that I think that having the alumni help the next generation is so important. To learn the ropes, to give advice, the kinds of advice you're asking from me, based on their experiences, which are very different from mine, and also to help those students kind of find that first internship or that first job. So I would ask all the students to keep that in mind once they leave.
That's awesome. I hope you enjoyed this interview. As an international student, I feel appreciated as John has empathy and makes an effort to connect and understand me. Maybe this is why he is qualified to hold a leadership position. As the department chair, he juggles between different responsibilities on a daily basis. I'm a bit surprised to find out that when he talks about research, he still has that pure excitement. So one thing we all can learn from John is, no matter where we at in our careers, having that naiveness and curiosity is very precious and beautiful. We are learning knowledge and then pushing boundaries in cutting-edge problems. We should feel proud of ourselves and proud of what we are doing. Science and research are really cool. If you find our video helpful, please like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. BME GSC and I want to help as many people as possible. Please leave a comment and tell us what questions you want to ask other faculty. We will try to accommodate your requests as much as we can and get your questions answered in future interview. See you next time.